We just came through eclipse season, and what a perfect time to learn more about the moon. And you can't get a better resource than Stephen Forrest's Book of the Moon, available on audiobook narrated by me. A direct link is available on the homepage of hightimelinebooks.com, or you can go to Audible or Apple Books. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. One of our great listeners is Danny, and she helps Kristin do our Level Up on some Sunday nights when they do it about once a month. And Danny is also an astrologer practicing and doing readings and has a great question.
Hey, Thomas and Robert, I had a question for you. I was doing a reading last week for twins, boy-girl twins. They're born minutes apart, so their charts are identical with the exception of a few minutes on the rising sign. But I mean, everything was in the same houses, same signs, identical charts. And so then the question became, from an evolutionary standpoint, are there life paths and themes and north node concepts and south node concepts? Are they all the same for twins? Or do you interpret it differently if you're reading them together? I'm just so curious. I really would love to hear your perspective. Thanks so much for sharing your knowledge with us, and I hope that you have a great week.
So, Robert, I love Danny and love this question and have had it quite a bit. And then it also is a precipitant question to, well, astrology doesn't work because here are these two identical charts and one twin ends up being a doctor in California and the other is an artist in Paris. So, twins have this bond that no other two human beings have, but when their paths even diverge over time, how do you interpret all of this? Let's help Danny out. This is a great question.
I love this question, and it's one that we don't get often. Statistically, twins are an unusual situation. First of all, they have developed together for 9 months in the womb. When they're delivered, think about it, in the delivery room, how long it takes to deliver one baby, cut the umbilical cord, put that baby in wherever it's placed, to then turn around and deliver the second baby and cut that umbilical cord. That process will generally take longer than 5 minutes between each birth. And the ascendant degree changes 1 degree for every 4 minutes of birth time. So she may find, here's the first one, that the actual degree and minutes on the ascendant between those two charts has changed duads, if she understands duads, which are 2.5 degree divisions of the signs. And that difference in duads, depending on the degree and minutes on the ascendant, will change what planet sub-rules that ascendant. So if you have 10 degrees, let's say just arbitrarily here, 10 degrees to 12.5 degrees of Aries rising, those degrees are sub-ruled by Leo. If you have, it's 10 actually, 10 to 12.5 degrees. If the next baby has between 12.5 degrees to 15 degrees, that degree on the ascendant is ruled by Sagittarius and Jupiter. So you've got two different ascendants. Yes, those charts are a lot alike, but the actual chart ruler, which is the ruler of the ascendant and the planet that rules that degree, changes every 2.5 minutes of birth, every 4 minutes rather, of birth time. Second of all, these are fraternal twins. One is a boy, one is a girl. Boys identify with their sun sign and their Mars sign. So in the boy's chart, his sun sign and Mars signs will be much more predominant than the girl twin. She is co-ruled by the moon and Venus. So women identify more with their moon and Venus sign, and they tend to project their Mars sign outwardly and will intuitively seek a man who fulfills their Mars and Sun archetypes. A man is reversed. He identifies with his Sun and Mars, and he will project his moon and Venus qualities out and seek women who embody his moon and Venus. qualities, if that makes sense. So those are two kind of attitudinal difference for Danny when she's reading the two charts. So those are two things, Danny. I love this question because when you get it, it's fascinating.
Well, that brings up a rectification point. So you can't do that when they're infants. Obviously, you need some time in order to have some life experiences. But are you saying that two babies that might be marked as 2 or 3 minutes apart probably really weren't?
True. Just think about it. 2 or 3 minutes apart is kind of a logistical impossibility in a birth. Think about how long it takes to deliver a baby and then cut the umbilical cord if you still spank them to wake up. But to make sure that baby is secure, and then you turn around and you now deliver the second baby. That's more than 2 minutes, just logistically.
Of course, nowadays they have mid-levels and other people assisting, so I guess two things like that could be going on simultaneously, even if the doctor wasn't directly involved.
Even if you didn't account for the difference in times of birth and just considered one as a boy and one as a girl, that alone makes a difference in how you want to emphasize the various factors in the chart. You see what I mean? Just
yes.
genetically.
No, and that was a great explanation, and I hadn't heard that before, so that's great. That one's going in the notes, my notes, my notes file. I was telling Robert about
it's a great question. It really,
yeah.
I don't know if I've told you this, but I many years ago had an astrology couple who asked me to do exactly this. I was over at their house one evening for dinner, and he brought out the charts of twins and said they were identical twins, both boys. And it's been so long, I don't remember the exact thing, but he said one of these boys has a health condition. It wasn't anything serious, but he had a health condition from birth. The other one doesn't. Can you tell which one? And I remember because I was 10 years into astrology at that. I said, yeah, this one has the health condition. And he said, you're right. How can you tell that? I said, look at the difference in the exactness of his ascendant to Mars versus this other chart's ascendant. This twin has the closest exact aspect. This one doesn't. So that's why I would say this one. So you can begin, if Danny gets more twins, she'll begin to be able to study these and realize there are little fine points like that will distinguish between the two.
You know, she was asking about life paths, too. I grew up with a set of twins. They were neighbors. We didn't go to the same school, but we were in the same neighborhood. And I looked them up the other day. They just came to mind, and they ended up, their dad was a cardiologist. They both became physicians, and one lived in Tulsa, one lived in Oklahoma City for their practice career life. But I noticed that one had passed away in his late 50s, and then his wife died just a few years after that. So one family of the set of twins, they were gone before they hit their 60s. And I just thought from that path standpoint, because they would have had all identical signatures for their longevity and for their death. So what would you do to explore that if somebody came to you and said their names were Matthew and Mark? Why did, I forget Mark, I think Matthew may have died. Why did Matthew die before Mark so dramatically? And so, like Mark might live into his 80s.
What I would do is exactly what I just said. I would look and see what the differences were in the degrees on the ascendant, and therefore the same will apply to the midheaven, because those 2 points are the most time sensitive. And if there's more than a 4-minute difference between the birth times, the ascendant and the midheaven will change by 1 degree, and then I would study their solar arcs. Because one of their solar arcs, and look at what happened. One of those twins died. The other twin's chart will show his experience of losing somebody or a sibling through death. Whereas the other chart, the boy or the man did die, his ascendant and midheaven are likely to pinpoint that through solar arcs. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
The solar arcs are established at birth. So they will both have the same solar arc at whatever age that guy died, 50. And yet one of those two twins solar arcs, ascendant and solar arc midheaven, will form an exact aspect to whatever death indicators are prevalent in that chart, whereas the other one will not. So that the first one will have a propensity maybe to die at that age. The other twin will have a propensity to experience a death in the family, but not his own. You see what I mean?
Would you go into that more? I'm having a hard time wrapping my little brain around that one.
All right. Well, you have two different ascendants, and they may vary by even 1 degree or 2 degrees. And then you have the house of death, which is the 8th house, and also the 4th house is considered to be in death too, the end of the matter. So if you advance the solar arc, ascendant, and midheaven in each chart, you will find that the one who died at 50 will have, in all likelihood, an exact aspect between their solar arc solar arc ascendant or midheaven to the planet that rules their death. Whereas the other one won't have that same exact aspect. He will have an aspect that coincides to experiencing a death in the family, let's say, but not his own. Because when you use equal houses, all houses will change. So the one twin that's born later will have at least 1 degree, if not more, difference on the ascendant and the midheaven, and therefore on every house cusp. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I'm trying to get as clear as I can.
Yeah, I do.
It's
so
fascinating.
And it goes back to that rectification point of letting life happen a little bit so that you have some experiences that you can set a time to. And we talked about this in one of the very early episodes of the podcast series, How to Rectify Based on Moving the Midheaven. Robert explained that extensively, and it's something that we've covered, I think, a number of times. Maybe we ought to do a fresh one on that. I don't know, but we might stick that in there again just to bring it back to people's awareness, because it is an important technique, and especially with what you're talking about here. But they have the same nodal degrees. They have the same Saturn. They have the same Pluto, the same Neptune, the same Uranus, probably the same Jupiter. The moon might be just a tweak difference, but those are otherwise identical charts. And yet one dies so early, or like I said, the example elsewise, maybe one ends up in Europe and one is a physician on the West Coast or East Coast or whatever. Like, they take different paths and they have the same chart. So what about, Danny was asking about the soul part of the equation, when it looks like they maybe don't have the same soul path?
Well, I don't know what you mean by they don't have the same soul path. They will. Even if there were two boys, though, their soul paths will be, and it's very fascinating. You read this all the time about two twin brothers happen to marry at the same year. In fact, sometimes I've read this too. They married twin girls, each one. Strange. But soul paths can be defined in a lot of ways. One may, if they both have, say, the sun Pisces and, I don't know, trine Jupiter, then they both might go into, quote, healing careers. One may be a physician, and the other one may be an artist of some kind. But it turns out his art will be of the nature of those themes about healing and life and death and darkness and light and all of that. So you can see, even if they have very divergent careers, you can still see where the soul paths have certain thematic underlying similarities. They're not going to have identical lives. As a rule, they don't. Although it is remarkable how many identical twins, even when separated, not at birth necessarily, but after high school, both wind up in law enforcement, or both wind up in medical fields, or both wind up in creative fields. And it's because they do share so much in common. The only difference, because of the time that it takes planets to move, even the moon will not have moved significantly between the two births, but the ascendant and midheaven will. So that's why you look at those 2 points, because they change 1 degree every 4 minutes. And a birth of twins is going to be longer than 4 minutes in between each birth.
All right. Well, this has been interesting. What a great topic. I love it.
I wish Danny luck. That's fascinating. Good for her. I'm glad she sent us that question.
Well, and stay in touch with that family because you'll want to come back and follow that up in about 15, 20, 30 years. So Danny will know a lot more then than she does now. That's for sure. It is a continual growth process. All right, Danny, thank you for that. Robert, thank you for another good answer. And Danny is very active with Kristin in our Discord community. I'm going to call it the D community. I'm tired of using that word. I don't like the energy that word brings. But that community, and we have a link to it at the top of funastrology.com, and this conversation continues in there until we can find a better place for it. So you can check it out there, and Danny hangs out in there. So if you'd like to maybe throw a chart up and see what they have to say about it, if you have questions, good place to do it. We'll see you next time on the Old Soul News Soul Astrology Podcast. Thanks for listening.